NYU was going to Shanghai, and why that experiment, who knows what's going to happen there, may have success because people are interested in China. China's universities, as I pointed out, also take themselves seriously, and that's a very good and important thing. So China sees itself, the Chinese government, the Chinese academic community, sees itself as a player, a global force in higher education, and that's important as well. We can see from all kinds of statistics that China has a growing share in research output, in patents, in other kinds of scientific productivity. I think sometimes those statistics are a little bit exaggerated, but nonetheless they're real. And China has shown quite remarkable, even unprecedented growth in this area. So these are some aspects of how China functions in the global academic context. Now let me get to the problems. I am a person who looks at life as the glass half empty. I'm not an optimistic kind of guy, so I'm always looking at the dark side. So please forgive me, and I may be exaggerating that, but I think it's important, nonetheless, that we look at that. There are two overarching challenges, and they are the opposite side of the coin of what I mentioned before in the accomplishments. And that is, how does China cope with massification? How does China build a system of higher education in which there is articulation among the different kinds of institutions, in which there is attention paid to the huge inequality between the East and the West, in which institutions at the bottom of the system do a better job in graduating the students who go there? Because China, by the way, just like the United States, this is something you shouldn't copy the United States about. We do a very bad job here in graduating the students we admit to our higher education system. We do a great job with access. We do a poor job with completion. And President Obama has recognized this, and they're trying to do something about it, so far without much success. But anyway, China has that same problem. And part of the problem is, as I said, building a system. Part of the problem is also ensuring that the growing private sector, most of it for profit, much of it of very poor quality, a large part of it unauthorized in terms of offering official degrees, but how to make that private sector productive and functioning in the national interest, not just serving the people who own those institutions. Again, by the way, we have the same problem. The for-profit private sector, small in the United States, but growing rapidly, has all kinds of problems with quality assurance, employability of graduates, and a relationship with the sort of broader public policy goals of the country. Let me mention a series of smaller but nonetheless important issues about China's higher education system. I was involved over the last 2 years in a study of academic salaries in 28 countries, and we discovered from this survey, from this research, where we compared salaries according to purchasing power parity, so we were having a fairly level playing field, that China and Russia were the two big countries at the bottom of the list. That's a big problem. What China has done to help with that problem is to pay differential salaries to a very small number of people in the top universities. I'm sure you guys do that. Otherwise, you wouldn't attract anyone from a foreign country. That's fine, although it brings its own problems, because then you have bad feelings on the campus between those people who are earning the nice international salaries and those, most of them, who are earning the not so nice local salaries. So the broader salary structure in China, and in, by the way, quite a number of our other 28 countries, is a serious problem for building a world-class system, both at the top of the universities and elsewhere. How do you get the best and the brightest to work in the academic profession if they know going in that they cannot make enough money to live in a normal middle-class style in China without having 2 or 3 other jobs or otherwise doing consulting or other things? So that's a problem. China does not have a national academic labor market. It's growing, it's starting, but it's not there. And again, we learned about this also in our 28 country study. Russia doesn't either. A number of countries don't. That is, there's a lot of inbreeding. That is, graduate students are promoted to be assistant professors and then they stay in the same university. Overall, bad policy, because you don't have a circulation of brains and you have a very hierarchical system within the universities. So China has to have, if it's to be really successful, a national academic labor market where somebody who would get a PhD either from a foreign country or from a Chinese university and be an equal competitor nationally within the country. I mentioned the problem of the Academy of Science. Very distinguished institutions, but doesn't quite fit a 21st century higher education system. How to integrate them better. What should be the proper use of English? Global English, imperial English. There's tremendous pressure in China, and by the way, in Korea and Japan and India and many places, that the scholars should be publishing in English. And they should be, and their work should be in international journals which have an impact factor, the world's most horrible term. That's fine, and it's a problem, because you are at a disadvantage using English because it isn't the native language. Just as important, when you publish in international journals, you must adopt the methodologies and the kind of mental ideas of us, because we're the editors, we're the publishers of the international journals. And we're not mean people, but we're embedded in our system. And we're not thinking about what's the best way to publish foreign scholars. You must meet our standards. We're not meeting yours. And we never will, by the way. So what should be the right role for English? I don't have a good answer, by the way, to any of these questions. If I did, the World Bank would hire me as a consultant, which they don't. China must have a meritocratic academic system, less guanxi. Guanxi is a universal term now, like Gaokao. Everybody in the world knows these terms. But there needs to be, and they exist, these kind of exams and this kind of relationship, these kind of relationships exist everywhere. But they're particularly strong in China, And if you're aiming at a world-class university system, it has to be meritocratic. And that's a new way of thinking. You have to get rid of corruption. There is some corruption. I'm sure this is a huge surprise to all of you in the Chinese academic system. And you see it percolating to the top every so often when one or more professors are caught plagiarizing and so on. But it's there. It happens again everywhere, but it's a particular problem in China and a number of other countries, and it has to be dealt with. In some fields, such as the social sciences, access to full information, both in print and on the web, is sometimes problematical. Let's put it that way. Some people don't like to admit that, but it's true. And it's not true in the hard sciences, but it's true in some cultural, political, social areas. That's a problem. And it's more of a problem in people's thinking about how the local academic system works than actual access to information. Because if you're smart, you can find it wherever you are. But it's the sort of public perception that it's somewhat limited. There are still serious funding challenges in the Chinese academic context, especially at the bottom of the system, and they have to be solved if China can both expand more, which it's going to do. And by the way, even if the government says, we don't want to expand much anymore, we've had enough because of problems of employment of graduates, problems of not having enough money, and so on, I can guarantee you, if you look around the world, you are not going to stop the expansion because there are significant segments of the population that demand it. And no matter what you do, you, the government, you cannot keep people from this kind of access. And we see this all over the world. So there's going to be expansion, and how to fund it is a very big question. Through tuition, through loans, through increased government expenditure, very complicated issues, but they'll have to be dealt with. And then also how to maintain the achievements at the top of the system that have already been accomplished. Because one thing is clear about research universities around the world. It's one thing to build them, it's another thing to sustain them. And we have many examples in the United States of state governments which have invested heavily in research universities, and then the budget goes bad, and those universities are not supported. My favorite example is New York State, where I worked for 20 years, which has up and down budget cycles. It's tremendously weakened the public universities in New York State. And China needs to be aware that you not only need to make the original investment in the 985-211 institutions, but you have to keep the money coming. You have to have a steady flow. So what I've tried to do in less than a half an hour is to give you a sense of the good and the bad, or I would say the good and the challenges. It's up to Chinese academic institutions, it's up to the government, it's up to the private sector, it's a little bit up to international partners like the University of Liverpool and others, NYU now, to make sure that national needs, that global competitiveness, that China is able to achieve its rightful place in the broader global higher education system. I'm not sure if I think it's going to make it. I think it's likely. China's done very well so far. But Would I bet on this? I doubt it. Thank you.
So in consideration of time, we will go directly into the ending conclusion speech. Thank you, Professor Altebeck, again for a wonderful ending speech.
Thank you all for being here. My name is Henry Shi Zhaolei. I'm the president of China Education Symposium. Thank you all for coming. I would just like to take this occasion to thank all the people who have contributed so much to making this conference happen. And first of all, our thanks goes to the Boston Chinese Photography Association. And so one of our friends is taking a picture of me right now. Thank you. They have been great partners from last year's conference, and a lot of photos that we use this year are definitely their work. Thank you so much. And also to Shuyi and Brian from the Asian Cultural Center. They printed all the very pretty brochures and did the editing of the promotional video, which I think we bored you with a lot of times. But it was fun, hopefully, the first time you watched it. I think the most thanks has to go to my outstanding team. I would just like to say here that it's a job well done. Thank you. And that, first of all, head of conference planning, also a VP of China Education Symposium, Yinan. And Yu Jia and Shi Jing, who headed up our volunteers. The panel managers, Junjie, Yiran, and Hongge, and Miaoxing. The pitch directed by Lily and Xiaodi. The designing of the brochure and the journal, Ruqian, Zhou, and Ziyun, and our treasurer, Tiffany. Thank you so much. I know that time is running out. I'm also very hungry, so I just have one slide. But I would like to talk a little bit about my personal story and I think the story of us sitting in this room. So my mom is a chemical engineer, and my father is a computer engineer. So, sorry, that was unattended. So when I decided to go to college, actually that wasn't much of a decision, but I chose to do engineering. It came as a shock to everyone. And a lot of people ask me why you're in the graduate school of education. Why did you switch your sort of path? And I want to answer that question once and for all. And in future, I could just say, oh, watch the video. But so it all dates back to preschool, kindergarten, or when I was really little. And I had a preschool teacher that decided that it was good to evaluate students based on how many times they can dribble a ball without stopping, without messing up. And the criteria was 30, because 30 is a magic number. And I could only do 5. And the teacher was very frustrated. And she goes like, well, if you can only do 5, other kids can do 40. You're not going to succeed. You're going to be a big failure. I'm going to call your parents. Actually, that wasn't enough. She brought in my parents, and apparently they had to be educated as well. So as you can imagine, I was totally delighted when I got accepted to Harvard. Just to be able to go back and say, well, your predictions are a little bit off in that respect. And I think this is a story of a Chinese kid who's being pushed up against a standard that does not make sense. I think we do a lot of these in education, and I think it's not only me. It's a story of a lot of suffering that has occurred with my generation and probably previous generations in the Chinese education system. But I think I'm one of the luckier ones who actually sort of made it out of the system. But there are a lot of people who did not. And I took the Gaokao, the national entrance examination. I was able to get into Fudan University. Some may consider that a failure, but it's all right. And But I realized that I scored in the 99th percentile of the national entrance examination. What about the 99% of people who did not score as high? But this is just looking at the national entrance examination numbers. What about the exam to get into high school? And surprisingly, this surprises a lot of people. I mean, when I was working with data from Ningxia, a rural province in China, more than 50% of the students who go to junior high school do not go into high school. And more so, a lot of people drop out before they even take the test to go into high school. And there's a lot of people that are not sitting in this room today that I think should be here. And so I feel like at that end of the spectrum, we're leaving behind a lot of people by using standards that do not make sense. And in the other end, there's also some curious things. I had a roommate in college. Well, he wasn't a very long-lasting roommate. He came when I was in senior year. So he was placed into my dorm. And it was his 8th year at Fudan doing his undergraduate degree. And so one of his key characteristics is that he doesn't get out of his bed. I never see him on the ground. He sits there and plays video games and sleeps and miraculously gets something to eat. He doesn't take courses. He clearly disengaged by the education system that we have in our colleges. And clearly, a lot of people who did not make it to the top 1% were disengaged, at least to somewhat degree, by the system that was before. And I think this is a common challenge. And I think there's a lot of work that we can do in that area. And when I talk about a lot of work, I say to people, when you think about how China is a developing country, there's a lot of work to be done. All you need to do is go to Beijing, and you'll know it, because you can't breathe the air, and so the work in education, I think, as evident by the panels and discussions that we have in this conference this year, is that education has to change simply because the world has changed. And I would like to end on the note that, this is a picture I got of a TED Talk I watched lately, and I don't know if I have the right to use it. I probably don't. But nonetheless, it says basically unify your political thought and do a lot of propaganda for education. And there's this guy sort of disappearing into the background. I think this epitomizes the education challenges that we face currently in China and probably in other places around the world. Is that some people seem to think that there's this truth, there's this prophecy of education. And if we only have that right, okay, we're gonna push it to everyone and make everyone learn from it, and they will be great. But I think the new world brings a new perspective to this dialogue. And that is precisely, I think, a great part of it is that challenges are currently democratized. Thank you. And that it's not up to a single person to figure out the most clever way to solve everything, but it's about different people from different perspectives, from different backgrounds, figuring out little pieces and talking to each other and making that changes progressively as a group, as we are doing in this conference room today. I thank you for being here. I would like to end on the note that this is Harvard, and being here doesn't say everything. It just says very little. But I think being here says something. It says something about the obligations that we have to other people who could not be here, but maybe should be here. I thank you, and I hope you've enjoyed your time here and you continue to participate in our events in the future. And on a final note, we also have, so my friend Yueling here is organizing another discussion about private education in China tomorrow. If you want to attend that session, please talk to him about the details. But thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for attending this year's conference. On the final note, we really value your feedback, so there's one more evaluation. If you can take your smartphone and just take 5 minutes, we would really appreciate it.